Marita, it's all yours. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to set my view to speaker, but I guess it doesn't really matter. Okay. Well, thank you, Harriet. First, thank you for this invitation. Kind of the genesis of this was a faculty member out there at UNLV. I'm in Washington, DC. Erica Vital Lazar is the editor at McSweeney's Publishers. And she is the editor of a new line of reprints of classic works, including, I'm very pleased, one of my early novels, A Woman's Place, which is the story of 3 young Black women who meet at an elite private college in the late 60s and the years and generations of their friendship. And so it was through Erica that I met Harriet. And Harriet and I immediately hit it off and immediately put our heads together to conspire to do something positive. So I'm really, really pleased to be here. And I'm looking forward, especially to the conversation that we're going to have. This little book, which was my COVID project. I think many of us during the lockdown period had projects, particularly projects that we found ourselves. I mean, I know people who found themselves doing artwork, writing novels when they'd never done it before. And for many of us, particularly creative people, that period of lockdown was actually enormously creative, even as there was all this anxiety and unfortunate death around us. It was also a period for me that was enormously productive. And this book has taken me on a very interesting journey. The response to it has been very, very enthusiastic, very gratifying. I have spoken at Johns Hopkins Medical on mental health. I've given lectures in the last year before Black women at Yale, MIT, at Harvard, around this same subject of mental health. So a little bit about how I came to be writing the book. Back in late 2019, I had kind of a little episode. Felt like I was having a stroke. I wasn't having a stroke, but my doctor said, well, let's give you an MRI and see what's going on. And it turned out that I had 2 silent strokes. Now, silent strokes are very, very, very common, and they're not lethal, but they do destroy brain cells. And when my doctor told me that, my sense of myself as a strong, capable, invincible Black woman really was kind of shaken to the core. And for a while, I felt like my body was punishing me. But in actuality, the more I thought about the kind of life I'd lived, the more I realized that my body was actually helping me. And that's because when I was 21, my mother died of a stroke. When I was 23, my father died of a heart attack. So by the time I was 23 years old, I had lost both my parents. It was tragic, it was traumatic, but it also gave me an important lesson about health. And I decided that I was going to live longer if I had anything to do with it, and I did, much longer than my parents. And so in my early 20s, I started a regimen of exercise, yoga, cardio. I watched my diet. I would go to seek a psychiatrist or a mental health professional if I felt like I was in crisis. And I recognized how important it was to have a wide network of supportive friends, and how important even it was to have a spiritual life. So that when my doctor told me that I'd had these 2 silent strokes, over time, I realized that if not for my commitment over several decades to mental and physical health, those strokes could have been lethal. I could not help or change my genealogical inheritance, stroke from my mother, heart attack from my father, but I could do everything in my power to construct a wall of defenses around the intrusion of those diseases on my life sooner rather than later. So I went home after talking to my doctor, and I went on the internet and saw that there was this really vibrant, vital, energetic conversation going on about the strong Black woman complex. And the thing that I loved about it was that it was multi-generational. There were older Black women, middle-aged Black women, younger Black women, all saying the same thing, that it's time for Black women to sit down, to take a rest, to say enough, and to learn how to ask for help. As I did more and more research, I found out that this inability of Black women to do those things has a very negative impact on our health. We tend to take everybody to the doctor and wait to take ourselves to the doctor last. We feel that it's a point of pride to be the fixer for every single problem in the family ATM, the family therapist, the family minister. That's our job, and we're proud of it. And yet we too often neglect to train our family members to give us that same kind of support in return. So the strong Black woman complex, we all know, it's manifested in everything from our mothers telling us, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about, which censors the normal expression of anger, sadness, and fear. It finds its manifestation in Black women just feeling very proud. I'm a strong Black woman, meaning that I can take anything. Well, actually, we can't take anything. We can't take everything, and we shouldn't take anything and everything. And our investment in this complex is deleterious in so many ways. It impacts our relationships with other people. It corrupts our relationships with other people, because if other people learn that, well, Marita's got that. Marita can handle that. Marita doesn't need any help, which corrupts the vision of who I am and who we are. It also means that our relationships are corrupted and really kind of inauthentic, because we're not really showing all that we are. We're not showing our vulnerability. We're not showing our weakness. And because as Black women, we live in a society, a culture that inflicts various expressions of systemic racism, macro, micro, 24/7, if we do not have in our lives regular systemic practices that help us to relieve stress, and care for our bodies and connect in a deep way with our spirits and our souls, we are conspiring with systemic racism to our great and grave danger. Doctors, scientists, therapists all now know that systemic racism puts inside the bodies of those who are its victims stressors and strains that can be measured the same way blood pressure is measured, the same way a temperature is measured. And those stresses and strains make it harder for us to stay healthy, to be healthy, to lose weight, to combat diabetes. And so if we are not honoring our commitment to treat our bodies as a temple on a regular basis, as I say, we're conspiring with all the forces gathered to get us and to make our lives endangered. So now the book. I'm a storyteller. And when I thought about this book, I thought this is really a fascinating, important story. And I wrote the book in a format that I've used before, which I call communal memoir. My book, Saving Our Sons, Raising Black Children in a Turbulent World. My book, Don't Play in the Sun, One Woman's Journey Through the Color Complex, were written in this same communal memoir format. And that's a format where I begin the book with my story, but I bring in the voices of other people affected by the story, so that this is a book, you'll hear my voice, You'll hear the voices of doctors, you'll hear the voices of therapists, and you'll most importantly hear the voices of Black women who talk with me openly, honestly, and very generously about how they heal, how they hurt, and about going into therapy and finding that therapy helped to save their lives. I wanted to give a platform in the book where Black women could destigmatize the idea of seeking professional mental health care. We're a long way from where we were even 25 years ago in terms of accepting the fact that there are periods where we need to seek the help of a mental health professional. But there are many, many pockets of resistance. Just yesterday, I was on a call with a group of students at Harvard University, and one of the students talked about her immigrant family and how difficult it was for her to talk to her immigrant family about seeking mental health. Many people who are engaged in emergency care, police officers, are still stigmatized if they need mental health care. But we're a long way from, as I say, where we were 25 years ago. So I'm going to read a couple of sections from the book to give you a flavor of the book. And then I'm really interested in your questions, in your concerns. I'm really interested in what you do to maintain mental health. I'm also really interested in the question of boundaries. How do you say no? Can you say no? How do you say yes to yourself? So I'm going to start with a section from the book where you will hear my voice, because I was one of those little girls who was told by her mother, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. I was 21 years old and my mother was dying. She lay comatose in a bed in a rehabilitation center for 6 months, wasting away before my eyes. I was a raised the Black flower fist, afro wearing militant, activist, and B+ average student attending American University. And I'd already started wearing the mask, the strong Black woman mask. As a strong Black woman, I knew what that meant. It meant you handled your business. You did what you had to do, no matter what. My mother was dying, but I had to continue to be a successful student. Being a strong Black woman meant that you didn't bother others unnecessarily with your pain. In the small apartment where I lived with my mother, my nights were sleepless, tear-filled meltdowns in which in the dark, I whispered, shouted, and screamed the questions I was terrified to ask in the light of day. Why would I soon be a motherless child? How would I go on? I'd rarely have ever seen my mother cry. Maybe she too cried in the dark. How I wish she'd cried in the light. Despite all that she'd made of her life after her arrival in Washington, D.C., as part of the great migration of Blacks from the South, there was a lot my mother could have cried about. As I said, one of the central parts of the book are these testimonies. I call them testimonies, but they were basically interviews that I had with some extraordinarily honest and generous Black women who talked about their mental health journey, their journey to healing and wholeness, and how important it was to practice that every day. I'm going to read a section from one of those testimonies from a young woman who grew up in a family against the backdrop of physical abuse, emotional abuse of her mother, and substance abuse. She says, no doubt we were jacked up. We were a mess. But our church was where we all came together, no matter what. I remember when I was 10 years old, one Sunday, I went up to the sanctuary and a woman prayed over me. She affirmed my purpose and what God had in store for me. I'll never forget that. The memory of that woman's on my hands kept pushing me through everything That and the family prayer line that my mother's side of the family has, and I'm still a part of. My own faith, my mother's faith, all of that got me through. And everything included while in college, being the family breadwinner, using her scholarship money to buy food and pay household bills. Everything included watching her parents' 36-year marriage end, but because endings are rarely neat, seeing bitterness and distance and quarrels still erupt. She said, because I was then still deeply into the superwoman, the strong Black woman syndrome, all of this was my burden to carry. But at 19, Jamie took the first of many steps to lay her burden down by going to counseling for adult children of alcoholics. She said, prayer led me to counseling. All my life, I've been told not to share our business, but prayer helped me realize it was okay to seek professional counseling outside the church. She found faith to endure and overcome in church, but in group counseling, she could hear and see through the din and the fog of her life at home. She began to put the pieces together like a puzzle. Her father told her, stand up for yourself. Don't let white people keep you down. But that warning was followed by the accusation that she talked too much and had a smart mouth. Her mother said, be a proud Black woman, be strong, I love you, but I need you. Don't tell anybody our business, tell me what you feel. You can handle all this. You're the first one I call, the one I can always depend on. Jamie was crumbling beneath this burden, but in group therapy, that was one place where she could be herself, something she was still discovering. Jamie had the first honest conversation she'd ever had with her parents. I told them, I can't carry you. I can't carry my anger. I can't carry my hurt. She set boundaries and put herself first. I wasn't protected as a child, but now I was ready to protect myself. I told them, I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad, but I release you. And in conversations with the book, I did a lot of research. I talked to a number of therapists as well as individuals. And someone asked me once, what was the most surprising thing that I had discovered during all my research? And I had to think for a minute, but then I realized that probably the most surprising conversation I had was with Dr. Kanika Bell, who is a therapist based in Atlanta. And several years ago, she did a study of Black women therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and their Black female clients. And the survey basically asked questions about peace of mind, joy, happiness. And the results of the survey revealed that for many of the women, for the majority of the women who answered the questions, peace of mind was something that they felt was for white women, that Black women were simply too busy dealing with the stresses and the strains of living while Black in America to have time to seek and to sustain and actively create peace of mind, joy, and happiness. And she concluded by saying, it appears that the first step to achieving inner peace for Black women may be believing that peace is even possible for Black women. A number of participants had trouble themselves even identifying with the concept of happiness, balance, and mental health. Many Black women see peace as a luxury for white women and as something not allowed for Black women. And I found that so surprising and so sad. And I think that this is the sort of the last barrier we've got to get through. That yes, we can be strong, we can be there for our families, but We have to not let anybody steal our joy. We have a right to joy. And that's a whole conversation that I hope we will talk about today. But it's really, really important that we seek happiness. We're not put on earth just to solve problems and just to work hard. Peace and joy belong to us. And I'm going to end, one of the most satisfying parts of writing the book, because I'm a storyteller, I write novels and nonfiction and memoir. I really wanted to be this to be a book that was full of very interesting stories. And I got to thinking about how in our cultural inheritance, we have these amazing sheroes. Sojourner Truth, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, current heroes, Maxine Waters, Stacey Abrams, okay, all these incredible women. And when we think about these women, we think only about their strength and their victories. We do not allow their pain or their vulnerability to be part of the conversation about them, or even to be part of the reason that we love and honor them. And so I asked myself the question, what would Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman say if we had made a space for them as a culture and as a community where they could talk about their pain as well as their triumphs? And I'm going to read a section from my channeling of Rosa Parks, my giving myself permission to speak in her voice, not only about her strength, but about some of her sorrows as well. And then I'm looking forward to our conversation. For all that, I was never scared of white people. When a white boy pushed me when I was a little girl, I pushed him right back. My grandmother told me if I wasn't careful, I'd get lynched. I told her, let him lynch me. You can look at me and see the African and the white and the Native American in me. There's been things written that of all the women who refused to give up their seat on a segregated bus to a white person, I was most well known because I'm light-skinned. And because of that, the white public in the North would feel more sympathy for our cause. I was still a Negro, and light skin didn't keep me from having to obey the laws of segregation until I decided not to. Light skin didn't keep me from getting fired from my job as a seamstress at the Montgomery Fair department store. And light skin didn't shield me from the pain of my coworkers refusing to talk to me after the boycott, calling me a troublemaker. Light skin didn't stop the hateful, threatening phone calls and the hate mail that started right after my arrest and followed me wherever I lived for the rest of my life. And I lived a long time. Raymond lost his job too. And because of the stress and the backlash against us and the isolation, we felt like we were in the wilderness. Seemed like Negroes were more scared of me than white people, than of white people. None of the civil rights groups that we'd worked for offered help. We knew we'd have a price to pay. We'd been paying it all our lives. But this price was heavy. And for a while would keep getting heavier. Eventually we moved to Detroit, where I had family. Raymond had to get a license and train it all over again to be a barber. And I got piecework as a seamstress. I'd always prided myself on my grace under pressure, being made of steel and soldiering on. But all that stress and disappointment caught up with me when I developed an ulcer and a throat tumor. I lived in 2 rooms with my mother and husband. We were in debt because of the medical bills. I'm telling you this because I think it's important for everybody to know how much it costs to be a hero even when you're willing to be one. Jet Magazine did an article that let the public know how we were living, and the NAACP paid the hospital bill. By 1961, 6 years after the boycott, our financial situation was better. I never let being poor stop me from activism. I joined neighborhood groups to get out the vote and improve the schools. Then in 1965, Congressman John Conyers hired me as an assistant to work in his office. Conyers was a great man. He and I got along well because he was a rebel like me. Then in a 2-year period, I lost my husband, my mother, and my brother. All of them died of cancer. And you can't tell me that the struggles fighting depression and segregation, struggling for respect and equality, didn't have something to do with all of them dying like that. And when I died, the city buses in Montgomery and Detroit reserved their front seats with Black ribbon. For 2 days, I lay in honor in the rotunda of the US Capitol. I was honored, but I was honored even more by what some people had said about me back in Montgomery when I was working with the NAACP. Oh, Miss Parks, she was a lady who held my hand when my uncle got beat up. She got my kid involved in a youth program. She was the one who came and tried to get me to register to vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if you all will let me, I would like to kind of, I don't know, comment or even ask a question. When you were talking about peace, right? You know, that really struck a chord for me, because I oftentimes will tell members of my family or even my dog, right? Can't you let me do whatever it is that I'm trying to do in peace? You know, and I'm assuming that this probably something that I even heard my mother say, and she probably heard her mother say. And I'm just wondering, is that whole thing about peace or not feeling potentially like like I'm supposed to be able to have peace? Is that something you think that's we're taught, particularly of women of color or African American women, that comes down from our mothers or an environment or whatever?
Well, I'll go forward and then I'll go back. What I heard was, can't you let me do what I have to do in peace?
Yeah.
And there are two parts of that. There's the peace part, and then there's the what I have to do part. And one of the things that was very important for me was when I trained myself to enjoy not doing anything. I'm an A-type person who, for most of my life, has been a hard worker and remain a hard worker, very productive, and who really felt that I always had to be doing something. And about 2 decades ago or more or longer, I realized, actually, no, I don't really have to do something every minute of the day. That there is joy in quiet, there's joy in silence, there's joy in meditation, and sometimes I don't have to do, excuse the expression, a damn thing. And so there's this part of, let me do what I have to do in peace. And we need, as women and as Black women, to give ourselves permission to do nothing and not explain it. And we know that the strong Black woman complex, which has its ancillary with the strong Black man complex, comes out of our experience in enslavement. You could not say to the person enslaving you, hold on a minute, I need to take a breather. Hold on a minute, I just gave birth to a baby. And so that the horrific experience of having our personal freedom and autonomy taken away meant that we had to censor our emotions. We had to wear masks. And so that is fully understood, that that was an adaptation to a horrible situation, an adaptation that saved our lives, even as it stripped us of our sanity. But we're now living in a world where we can look at that and examine and assess the toxic nature of this inheritance. And it plays out even today. Young girls, I was talking to my husband's niece a couple of months back, 10 years old, who lost her father, her stepfather. She was very, very close to him. And I was taking her and her sister to see a movie one day. And I said, you know, I know that this is a tough time for you guys. And I know you must feel so sad. And I know you've cried a lot. And the 10-year-old girl, she said to me, Aunt Marita, I haven't cried. I haven't cried. And then when she corrected herself, she said she cried once, but she didn't let herself cry again. And so she's already learned at 10 years old how to censor her emotions, how to keep on trucking, because she's a little, strong Black woman. And in my research, one of the most satisfying discoveries I made was the number of Black women and Black groups that are really working to address this issue. And one of the most impressive ones is a group called Black Girls Smile. And I write about that group in the book. And it was founded by Lauren Carson, who's a young woman who suffers with clinical depression, twice attempted suicide, but has founded an organization for young girls between the ages of, I think, 11 and 15, in mostly inner city schools, where they go in and do programs with these young girls around expressing their emotions, expressing their feelings, how to have conversations with adults about what they need. And she's doing some really, really important work. And so that she's trying to break the cycle, the generational cycle of the chokehold that this idea that we cannot show vulnerability and weakness has on our community.
Okay, I wanted to speak to that too, but I'm going to let somebody else, anybody else that has a comment before I ask about this vulnerability, I can't even talk, issue. And see, I know a whole lot of you all on this call today, and I can't believe you all are being quiet. So, you know. But I will ask this. Okay, so when you talk about being in that vulnerable space, right? For so many of us who are, in this everyday world of work, we'll find ourselves not allowing ourselves to go there, right? Because let me speak for me. To show that I may be vulnerable is to show that I also may be weak, that could be taken advantage of, particularly in the workplace. So that becomes scary,
right,
to do.
Right. And particularly, for Black women, the angry Black woman, the minute, so often in meetings in predominantly white institutions, we are marginalized. We'll say something and, white guy will say the same thing. Nobody said anything when we said it, but when he said it, it's greeted with applause and Nobel Peace Prize. And I think that it's important you have to navigate. You have to figure out which battles are worth fighting, okay? Because the microaggressions that can diminish you are so persistent that if you tried to deal with every single one, you'd only be doing that every day. So I think first it's important to figure which is the most important battle, for you to fight. Whenever I've been working in predominantly white institutions, I always formed a sister circle. That is, I always reached out to other Black women in that institution and said, look, I need to get together with you all once a month for lunch or potluck or something, so I can stay sane, so I can stay Black, so we can strategize around how to protect ourselves in an environment that is sometimes quite threatening and quite diminishing. And then I think that, as I said, it's important to pick your battle. And I think that very often people will feel that they can't say anything if their boss has transgressed. They can't say anything unless they're in an inviolate position where the boss cannot punish them, or fire them. But I think that if you are in community with other like-minded people who may be suffering the same types of diminishment, that's the beautiful thing about groups working together. You can strategize very creatively around how to effectively make it known that this is a problem. I mean, I think we always feel like we have to go into the boss office, hands on hips, ready to burn the mother down. But that's one strategy, but it's not a particularly effective strategy. And I think that there may be times, for example, when it may benefit you to take out your braids. If they say, we don't want you to, maybe you'll do that and work yourself into a position where nobody can ever say that to you again. So I think that what's always served me well is being in community with other like-minded people with whom I could strategize, and also assuming that an issue could be addressed. Because we face so much diminishment, so many microaggressions, we just automatically assume that there's nothing that can be done, when often something can be done. So that's about all I have to say on that.
There is one question in the chat, and Alicia, I'll get to you after we do this question in the chat. Okay, I see that your hand is up. This question comes, it comes from Jasmine. How can we speak up in our careers and workplace?
Well, I mean, I think that's because I saw that question in the chat, and I think that's what I was answering. I think that the reason that I always wanted to have a sister circle is so that I wasn't going to be isolated. And that sense of isolation can be so extreme and can make us feel like we can't speak up when often we can. And I think also it's important, like somebody asked me once, she said, well, in my situation, I'm always the person, this is a Black woman, most of my colleagues are white, and I'm always the person, whenever it's an issue about race, everyone looks at me, and I'm always expected to answer. And I said, well, you have an opportunity there to simply say to your colleagues that it is just as they expect certain things of you around race, that you expect certain things around them. That because that they're committed to inclusion, inclusion, equality, and diversity, they're going to carry their share of the load in making that happen. And you can simply say to people, it really makes me uncomfortable when everyone in the room always looks at me when the issue is race, because this is something that belongs to all of us. And people won't say that, and they need to say that. Your colleagues need to be educated and can be educated with compassion and with patience. No, you shouldn't have to do it, but you do have to let people know that the racial burden in the workplace is not something that you carry by yourself.
Okay, well, we have questions from Alicia Sherwood, and then following her will be Egypt Howard. Alicia?
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for putting this platform together. I attended your platform with Yale, and I was a researcher at the time. And even as I came on this particular Zoom, it was like, am I Reverend Sherwood? Am I Dr. Sherwood? Just the whole naming process. And we talked about the anchor child in the Yale workshop, if you can remember.
Mhm.
And what I gained from all of that is that when I try to share this information with other Black women, when I try to tell them how important it is to dismantle the myth, when I preach about it, the whole purpose of us getting on the Yale call was so that I could bring it back to the church, and we were all supposed to unravel the myth of the strong Black woman. And I explained to them how important your book was. We read the book, we did all the discussion, and then I started looking at the effects. Like, you guys are not implementing what we learned. You're still taking on these responsibilities. You're still afraid to cry. You're still not showing me the mask. Like, I tell them that I wear masks, and that when I see the mask that you talk about in the book, I try to take it off, and I tell them I need to take this mask off because right now I'm acting like Reverend Sherwood, or I need to take this mask off because this is Dr. Sherwood talking because I got this during the pandemic. And it's almost like I'm keeping it a secret. It's like, why am I keeping it a secret that I got my doctorate during the pandemic? And I tell them this, and I struggle, and I'm just being very transparent, because that's part of dismantling this strong Black woman thing. It's like, I am a human being. I have feelings just like you do. But when I see that we're not addressing it, because I believe the first step is just to address that you wear a mask. Like, I wear a mask. I know I wear a mask. And as I minister to people, I tell them that I have to put on this mask and that mask. But when I'm around other Black women, it's almost like there's an intimidation, or there's some kind of something I can't put quite name. And I'm sure that you probably have more experience in this area, but I just wanted to let you know what a blessing this book has been to me, and how I use it as something that gets me through the tough times when I can't put my finger on it. And I'll look at your book, I'll read a story, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. Thank you. But thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think it's important to remember how long it took us to become new age strong Black women. That is, before you picked up my book, you were probably already dismantling the mask. And I can honestly say that it probably took me 2 decades of consistent work to learn how to not to enjoy doing nothing, to tell people, do it your darn self, to practice, to say, honestly, I'm not going to let everybody steal my joy. And I think that you are a minister, you have clearly a gene for service, so that what's being asked of you, it seems to me now, is to extend patience and compassion to those Black women. They're going to read the book, and then they're going to read it again. And I think that rather than ministering or preaching, the best thing is to try to interweave into your relationships with them the concepts. I mean, for example, one of the women in the book talked about going in therapy after needing to go into therapy for many years. And she got so comfortable that she simply, when she would be out with her girlfriends, she would say, I'm in therapy. I'm in therapy. And this is, it's changed my life, blah, blah, blah. And then quietly in the corner on the down low, the other women would come to her, oh, I'm so glad you talked about therapy. I never knew what it was like. I've always wanted to go into therapy, but now I think I have the courage to do it. So a lot of this work is not it's about reading the book, but mostly it's about weaving it into our lives slowly, daily, on the regular. And I think that with those women, you clearly are a creative person. I would not give up on them, but I would find ways to sneakily sneak in the concepts. For example, you could start with, let's all go let's make a commitment once a month. We're all going to go on a walk. We're going to find some part of our community. We're all going to go for a walk. Then you could add on to that. Well, who wants to join me in practicing 10 minutes of meditation? Everybody's not going to want to do that, but believe me, some people will. So that rather than making it sound like an assignment or a 100 things you've got to do before you die, you make it something that is integrally woven into their lives. And you continue to talk about how these practices of joy, blah, 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 have influenced your life. But I think weaving it into the natural discourse, the natural rhythm of these women's lives is the way to go. But I really thank you for your enthusiasm, your commitment to your sisters. Don't give up. Just be more creative in the way in which you weave the practices into your lives. And even if people resist you, that's something you could start talking about. Oh, I don't want to do no meditation. 10 minutes. I ain't never sat still for 10 minutes. Well, why not? Believe me, I bet in this hypothetical conversation, if this woman had a really good conversation about sitting still for 10 minutes and said she couldn't do it, when she got home, she'd try it. So just weave it into the normal everyday of life. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Egypt.
Yes, hello. So my question, I'm a mother of 2 Black girls. And so how do we find the balance in raising our Black girls to be able to weather the storm and survive in this world and hopefully thrive, but not, I guess, add that pressure or, set them up to already be feeling like they have to be that strong Black woman? Because I think that's been a really hard piece for me to find the balance. Like, I want them to be strong and I want them to be able to fight for themselves and speak up and be able to handle this world. But I also don't want to project onto them some of the harmful pieces of the strong Black woman syndrome.
Well, just as we were told relentlessly, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, just as we were told over and over again, you've got to be 3 times as good to get half as far as white people, we can relentlessly, repeatedly tell our children, you have a right to your emotions and your feelings. You have a right to cry if you want to cry. You have a right to feel sad. Feeling sad does not mean that you're weak. Failing does not mean that you are stupid. We were told how to be strong Black women. We were given an instruction manual in everything our mothers, usually our mothers, said to us. And we can do the same thing if what we want to have is well-balanced young women growing up in the 21st century. We can talk to them about studying for the SATs. And we can talk to them about recognizing that as they study, sleep and rest is as important as studying for 12 hours. So that anything we want our children to be, we can tell them to be that person. We were told how to be the women we've become. And conversely, we can talk, if we're in therapy, we can talk to our daughters about being in therapy. If someone in the family dies, there was a one of the women in the book, her husband, her partner died during COVID. I had interviewed her earlier. And then after the book was finished, I called her to check on her, see how she was doing. And her partner died. And it was a horrific death. This was the early days of COVID. He went to the hospital, and you know how they didn't know how to treat people. And then if you were Black, they really didn't know what to do. So they sent him home, take 3 aspirin, go home. Then a couple of days later, he was really in distress. And so they got in the car and they're going to the hospital. And in the passenger seat, on the way to the hospital, he dies. Her 12-year-old daughter is in the back seat witnessing this. So you can imagine how horrific this is for this woman and her daughter. She immediately, after she had buried her partner, got into therapy. And she got her daughter into therapy. And she said, I let my daughter see me cry. And that told my daughter that it was okay for her to cry. And we comforted one another. And we got strong, comforting one another. So it's not that we don't know how to raise girls who will be mentally balanced so that they will be ambitious and successful, but they will also know how to take care, engage in self-care. We're just not used to saying that, but we have to find the language. We have to use the language. We simply tell our girls the things we want them to value. We tell them the things we want them to know.
Thank you.
Sharita, you're next. Sharita, you have your hand up?
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm
Okay.
trying. I was trying to unmute myself.
Be careful while you're driving.
Look, too many things at once. This conversation is so on time for me right now in the area where I am in my life right now. My question though is, going back to the example, the channeling of Rosa Parks. I am a strong advocate, almost like an activist for Black women, our Black people, fighting against racism and oppression, trying to unite our people. And what I've noticed is there's a lot of people, especially in higher education, a lot of Black people they're tired, they're burnt out. And so I don't want to stop because we need it. And if we don't do the work, then it doesn't get done.
That's not true. That is not true. That is a false belief that we hold on to because it makes us feel super strong. We can train other people to do the work. To interrupt you for a second, I used to teach at a number of universities. And as a Black faculty member in a predominantly white institution, very often the Black students would come to you, oh God, they'd use you up. You were mama, you were therapist, you were mediator, you were conflict resolution, you were everything. And typically Black faculty feel, oh, I've got to do this because, these young Black students are isolated. Well, if I were in a situation like that today, one of my goals would be to empower those students to create what they needed in terms of support on campus so that I could focus on some mentorship, but not therapy, so that I could focus on teaching them the subject that I was supposed to teach them, but not constantly holding their hand. And by mentoring them around forming student support groups, getting the university to give them the mental health services they need, that is empowering them. That's not teaching them that every Black faculty has to solve all of their problems. And no, if you don't do it, if you're afraid that it won't get done, your job is to train somebody to do it so you can rest. Because you're going to burn up, and burn up, you're no help to anybody. I think that this idea, if I don't do it, it won't be done right. You're not supposed to do everything. You're supposed to train the next generation of leadership so they can take over from you.
So I'm not referring to the students. I'm referring to the, our staff that have been doing the work, and we get everything thrown on us from, the college itself, and people are tired to the point where it's, you're just seeing a lack of participation amongst our own demographic. And so that is more so my concern. It's, everyone is experiencing the staff, the employees are experiencing burnout. And I know it's not on me it's like logically, I know it's not on me to keep it going, but based on that, syndrome, I don't want to see it stop. And so that ends up pushing me to continue. So I that's more so what I'm trying to find out is, how do we motivate those that are burnt out to get back in the fight to get this accomplished?
Well, I think that we all know that people who are burnt out need a rest, that they can't continue going, or they won't be burnt out, they'll be extinguished. And that's not what you want. So I think if you're talking about, staff who are burnt out, the people at the higher level who create the larger environment that you work in have to be informed. And this is all over the country now. Every profession, doctors, teachers, everyone is burnt out. People are resigning, So what you're talking about is very, very common, and there's a lot written about it. It's all over the news. But I think that very often, let me ask you, what is the worst thing that you imagine happening if you were not able to work as hard as you want to work?
Things will continue at the status quo, and we won't. It's just the systemic issues that we're dealing with will continue. That's fair.
What's more important, the institution's health or your health?
I'm going to say both, because collectively as Black people, and I'm not worried about the institution, I'm more concerned about our people. And I'm one of those people. So it's a collective of us. And the reason why I say that is because there's not enough Black staff and faculty already for our students to see us in these positions, to encourage them to continue their education or even pursue their education. So if we continue to get burnt out and fall off, what is that going to do for our youth? Because there is also a decline in their enrollment and retention and graduation. So it's a—
Well, I hear you being the prototypical strong Black woman. You're carrying absolutely every single part of this problem on your shoulder. You're carrying your burnout, the students' disappointment, the fact that there's not enough people to motivate the students, the fact that there aren't enough students, the fact that you're carrying absolutely everything on your shoulders, which means that you don't have to worry about the institution. The institution's gonna be fine. You're the one that's going to be extinguished. And I think that we really, and for example, Rosa Parks did yoga. Rosa Parks meditated so that she remained an activist her whole life, and her whole life she practiced, she had embedded in her life practices of self-care, that allowed her to be an activist, and also care for her body, her mind, and her spirit. So all I can say is that I would just advise you, because you're clearly committed. Nobody can question your commitment to the students, the institution, Black people. I'd like to see you giving some of that a little more to yourself. And I think that you would find that you would actually be even more creative, more effective if you pulled back and gave yourself some room to breathe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Watson and then Candace.
Hello, thank you. Professor Golden, you actually answered my question 4 hands ago, but I just wanted to come on and just say thank you so much for this. And I don't know who said this is really timely for them, but I would echo that. So I've been trying to conjure, so I don't just am a long-winded commenter that happens in these scenarios. But I guess in terms of a strategy, something that I have been cognitively and emotionally thinking about and and unpacking is a better way to say, is the notion or the concept of community of rebellion, community as rebellion, and the power of community and how we can build those connections around our mutual acknowledgement of letting ourselves be mediocre, messy, angry, upset. And I think you've spoken to that already, but I guess I don't know what else, because I think you've done a really nice job. Now I'm babbling. I'm looking at Harriet. Harriet's like,
Well, I love
Dr.
it.
Watson.
I love it when you say that we have a right to be mediocre. We'll know that there's real equality in this country when Black people do not have to be superstars to get a particular job. The reason that it's always the first Black person to do this, or the first, because the Black person who got the job had to be a superstar. You would never have a mediocre Black Supreme Court justice. Okay, if there was a level playing field where we could just be average and still get a great job, all this first person, that'd be over with. So thank you for saying that we have a right to be mediocre. And we also have a right to let things go, let things be. And this idea that, you know, if we don't do it, if we don't carry everything, what are we afraid of? That tells me that we don't really trust other Black people. We don't trust ourselves to infect them with our zeal, our passion, but we are doing that. So thank you for saying that we have a right to be mediocre and average. I love that.
Thank you. And one other thing I just want to say very quickly, something I've started to do in my small solar systems, small, medium, and large, is actually front loading in meetings that are either departmental or program that, all right, right now, I'm going to be messy, and you can view me as a strong, weepy Black woman. Like I front load for whatever scenario I'm in. So then that allows me to name that space and then inhabit that space in ways more consistently for myself. And I hope, and it seems that it may happen in some ways, that those that are around me will then come up either after the fact or even in that moment and say, you know, Doris, I'm really glad you said that, because I feel emotional too, but being emotional doesn't mean I don't have a voice, or I don't breathe passionately. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, well, I think that's very powerful. And particularly if you have colleagues who have come to you and said that it's made a difference, that it's opened a space where the meetings can be much more authentic. That's great.
Thank you again.
Mm-hmm.
Candace.
Good afternoon. The one area that we rarely talk about, if at all, are biracial mothers and what they go through in their struggle. My mother was German and Indian, and coming off an Indian reservation to live with a grandmother because your mother's taking care of someone else's kids. She fought for everything, absolutely everything. She went to college, she went to UCLA. She raised us to be very strong and to work very hard. And that's exactly what she told us we had to do. But even with that said, she went through bouts of depression. No job application ever had a space for her to check on who she was. That bothered her tremendously. And I remember as a child seeing her sit there, and I would go to her, put my arms around her and let her rest her head on my shoulder just for a minute, just for that moment of rest, to let her know that it was going to be okay. And as I grew up, there was no support system for her. There wasn't. But she was wonderful in the sense that we knew we were loved. She didn't tell us we had to be or do anything. She just told us we needed to work hard to achieve whatever our dreams and goals were in life. And it is something about that woman who's living in two different worlds and doesn't feel like she fits anywhere. But she instilled such a sense of self in us. Now, of course, I take many things the way my parents raised me growing up into my own household, but there were many things that I changed. My parents in the 50s growing up, they couldn't even vote. They didn't even have a say in their world about what was going on in the city in which they lived. But I think that we have to realize that as Black women, there were so many different shades of us, so many different ways that we've grown up with different values. And I feel like my parents did a really good job of giving us a sense of self. But my mom was that woman, that strong woman who did absolutely everything. She fought for everything, absolutely everything, because she felt like she had to. She had to. So this forum is very much needed. We don't have to fight all the time. We don't have to be unhappy or hurt. But I always look back at my mom and the wonderful things that she instilled in us as my siblings, as children, and love was always at the top of the list. My parents would break us up into groups studying for homework. My mother would take the sciences and the English, and my father would take the foreign languages and the math, and make sure that our lessons was done. Learning was at the topmost of the list. My father went to Virginia Union in Virginia. And so for him, he was the only one in his family to go to college. The only one. So it was very important for us, but the strong Black woman that we see in our households that we can look up to and say, you know, you've given me absolutely everything you had to give. And I'm going to do my best with what I was given.
Thank you. That's a beautiful testimony. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions for our wonderful speaker this afternoon?
Yes, I actually posted a question in the chat. Good afternoon, ladies. This is a wonderful conversation. Great advice. I hope to put it into use at my job. But here's my question. How do you take off the mask of the strong Black woman without then kind of going to the extreme and then becoming the overly emotional, angry Black woman?
Well, I think that it's not so much that, you know, we put on this, and these masks are all Black or all white. It's funny about the, you know, this myth of the angry Black woman. And I'm trying to think when the last time I was a real angry Black woman. Yeah, I think we have in our heads the angry Black woman. But if we really think about it, I bet many of us can't even remember the last time we were actually that stereotype. And I think that, as I said in response to one of the earlier questions, that taking off the mask is something that is not something that we learn to do over the weekend. It's a consciousness change. It's a change in attitude that has to be learned, reinforced, affirmed day by day in every small and every large decision that we make. And so it's not like after this Zoom call, I'm gonna take off my mask. No, after this Zoom call, you're gonna have a lot to think about, a lot to think about. And then I would suggest picking one thing. Maybe you want to think about joy, and just think about joy and peace and happiness in your life. Is there any peace, joy, and happiness in your life? Why not? And how can you get more peace and joy in your life? Maybe you want to think about how to have, as one of the earlier questions was, how to talk to your child about not wearing that dangerous Black woman mask. And so you make that your project. So this is a big project. It's a lifelong project. It's a beautiful project because we don't have to do it alone. There are many women in our lives, if we really look closely, who are modeling being new age, strong Black women. That is women who, yes, are strong or in charge, take no prisoners, but women also who ask for help, who admit to fear, who will go into therapy, who will admit they're afraid. In the same package, that woman exists. And so when you see that woman, talk to her about her journey. So this is a journey that would begin with, say, for example, reading my book. But that book opens up a roadmap that, as I say, is done every day. And also our families are important. I think it's important to let our families, our husbands, our partners, our spouses, our children know that we want to be different kinds of mothers, spouses, that we need our children's help. We're going to ask more for them. We're going to ask more that they be more appreciative. We're going to ask our husband to allow us to sit down sometimes. We're going to wake up some days and say, you know what? This is a me day. Don't nobody give me nothing to do, ask nothing for me. I'm going, I don't know what time I'll be back. These are small little things that you begin to do and they change your life. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
I have a couple of housekeeping things that I want to take care of. That doesn't mean that in the amount of time that we have left that you can't still ask questions. But, you know, one of the things that we did in scheduling this particular event was to say that the first 10 women or the first 10 people who actually signed up and attended today's session would receive a copy of Marita's book.
Oh,
and
great.
And I do have books here. And so I'm going to tell you who you are, who gets this book, okay? Melva Thompson Robinson. She was number 2 actually to sign up. Nicole Hudson, Doris Watson, Rochelle Walker, Jamila McGrew, Kalia Rush, Lakeitha Graves, Tafara Rochelle, Zan Goodman, and Monique Soma. So I do have the books here. So you just need to come on through. You know, we like y'all to come through the intersection. I'm sure we'll also have something for you to do when you come through here. But okay, the books are here. So I want to thank you. Okay. Spam call. Okay. I want to thank you.
In response to that last question, I think one of the most productive things that could happen after this call is for those of you who are all, you know, at UNLV, who really want to figure out how to integrate into your lives the things we've talked about, is to form a sister circle. Is to reach out to one another and say, you know what? I want to try to move from theory to practice. Are there 3 or 4 other of you who would like to continue this conversation so that we can strategize together, so that we can hold one another accountable for actually learning how to take off the toxic strong Black woman mask and create a healthy, balanced, strong woman mask instead? Because I think that working in community, working in sisterhood is very, very powerful.
We already have some of that infrastructure kind of set a little bit through the BPWA and other organizations that we have here at UNLV, but certainly, you know, and I think that from BPWA that we've often talked about.
What is BPWA?
Black Professional Women's Alliance at UNLV. We're kind of an ad hoc type of a group that we at least communicate often via email, sometimes in person, but certainly, you know, that is an organization by which some of this probably could occur. And I think that we've talked about it offline a couple of times, and there are several folks who are members, you know, or communicate within that organization that are here. So, and then Doris is saying we are doing 2 groups in the College of Ed.
I saw that. Yeah.
So,
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, and these need to be groups where people can hold each other accountable. I mean, when was the last time you had a breast exam? When was the last time you went to the doctor? When was the last time you said no to somebody that it was really hard for you to say no to? And those kinds of, I mean, it's not just getting together to talk, but it needs to be a group also where people are actually giving everybody the right to hold them accountable.
I think there's a mechanism for that to occur, certainly within that group, to start and or, you know, to, you know, at least look and to investigate how we could do that, you know, especially since the pandemic and checking in on folks. And so,
yeah,
I think
and even people can do it on Zoom. I mean, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And I would like to just plug before we go, we have 6 minutes left, the Hurston Wright Foundation. I know that many of the women, many of the people on this group, on this call today, love literature. And on October 27th, the Zora Neale Hurston Richard Wright Foundation will be presenting the annual Legacy Awards. And this is like the Black Oscars for literature. Every year we honor, in a beautiful program, the best writers in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. We honor important Black cultural workers. This year we will be honoring Elizabeth Alexander, the poet, memoirist, and head of the Mellon Foundation. And so I just want to urge everybody, if you love literature, if you love reading, visit hurstonwright.org, and you'll get an idea of the work that the organization does, and you can get a free ticket to this year's Legacy Award, which will be virtual and which will be another wonderful program. And of course, my website is maritagolden.com.
Before you jumped off here, I kind of wanted to jump in here real quick. And Melv, I'm glad you jumped in here and added that. First of all, thank you for doing this. And Melva, thank you as my friend and sister for including us as a lot of my CSN sisters that are on here, because she shared it with me and we were able to get it out yesterday to get in here. And my director, my AVP, Dr. Felicia Thomas, is on here. And these are things that we're wanting. And some of the people that spoke on here are my colleagues. And as you all are talking about, we're envious. I'll be honest with you. I know I am, of the things that you all are doing at UNLV, because we don't have this at CSN and we've tried it and it has failed. So I'm saying, if you all don't mind, please share it with us, whatever you all are doing. Maybe it will help us eventually be able to build this at CSN, but it gives us something that we don't have here, to be able to try to build this network of sisterhood, because we don't have it. We just don't have it. We tried it. We have it. And I wish, like you said, the Cross Institute, we definitely need it, because I actually, when the pandemic hit, I actually met a couple of sisters at UNR that would love to connect with us too. So I do think it's a much needed group that needs to start. And I just wanted to commend you for putting this together, because it definitely is needed, definitely across NSHE in so many ways. And I'm pretty sure my colleagues will definitely agree to that.
Well, thank you for solving the mystery for me, because as I was looking and plugging in all of the sending the invitations, I was like, boy, we got all these women from CSN. How did they get this information? And so now I know that it was my good friend, Dr. Doris Watson. Love you for extending that olive branch, right? And providing that information.
It was Melva.
Oh, okay. Well, so there you go. Thank you, Melva. My partner in crime. That's what that is. No, and certainly anything that we do here in the intersection, right, that you feel will be of importance, right? Y'all just come on. Yeah, you can get on our mailing list and that kind of a thing. But certainly when we're talking about, BPWA, between Melva, Doris, myself, and some other folks who are relatively active in that organization, we can certainly extend that, because I don't see where that is an issue, right? Because we're all about trying to get the same things done and to be in support of each other. So
and for us at CSN, one of the things that Sharita had mentioned, and I know Dr. Morris and Dr. Thomas really pushes us, is that we are intentional about letting our students know who we are and what the possibilities are for them. And we do have a lot of students that will be moving over to UNLV. So it is really big for me that I know who you are over at UNLV, so I can say, hey, I know Dr. Melva Thompson, she's over here. There's Doris Watson, she's over here. I like to do soft handoffs for my students, not just saying that they're in that building. I want my students to be able to know there is a person that can help them. You may not necessarily be in their department, but they have someone that they can connect with that can help them in whatever situation that they may have. So that's why it's really important for me. Thank you, Doris. I will push I have it. Thank you. I appreciate you.
well, thank you. Seriously, thank you, everybody, for coming today. As I said, I have your books. Those of you who I said were going to win that book, you have won it. It's here in the intersection, the Student Union, room 121. I also, in the chat is a link to just a very, very quick survey for you to take, so that we can know what kinds of programs, activities, or whatever that you'd like for us to plan in the future along these lines. And last but certainly not least, Marietta, thank you so very much. I was telling my colleague, Dr. Marrero, earlier today that I was really excited about today. And I think I've told that to you too, that was really excited after months of planning and pulling this together. And I just want to say it was so much more than what I could have